I wanted to talk about Bernie Sanders and Eugene Debs. Now, Bernie, back in Vermont, 1979, him and some others actually made a documentary about Eugene Debs, and they highlight how oftentimes he isn't taught in American public schools because the wealthiest people who control the media and control like the education systems, they don't really want him to be glorified. They don't want him to be highlighted because it's a direct interest to their power. The things that he fought for were definitely not in their best interest. Now, Bernie's a democratic socialist, and so it's a little bit different. He doesn't want there to be no private businesses at all, but he thinks that certain things like healthcare, for example, should be run by the government because it takes out the profit incentive. He might not argue that things like a lot of like food and clothing needs to be completely done by the government. But they both ran for president. Debs ran with the Socialist Party, though, where Bernie, instead of trying to run as a socialist, like he admits he's a democratic socialist, he runs with the Democratic Party. Likely because he knows he has a stronger chance. So it's highlighting that Debs really liked William Jennings Bryan in 1896, but he became hardcore socialist when he was reading Karl Marx in prison. Now Bernie is more like George Orwell, democratic socialist, maybe not as quite as far to the left as William Jennings Bryan. If you read Bernie's proposals, he's okay with people accumulating some wealth, just not ridiculous amounts that destabilize our democracy. For example, Bernie really likes the book Millionaire Next Door, and I would imagine that he was pretty frugal and that helped him become a millionaire, but the book's main message is that first generation millionaires saved their wealth. They were wise. They didn't spend a lot on consumer items, nice clothes and fancy cars, fancy food. And so Bernie would likely argue that it's okay to some have more than others. Actually, doesn't want to, if you really look at his taxes, he really doesn't want to tax those that are making between 100 and 200,000. And my understanding, he doesn't really want to tax them more. It's more people that are making millions of dollars. He wants to keep taxing them at higher rates, but he wants a good, strong middle class and upper middle class, from what I've read of his books. So one of the things that Eugene Debs fought against was World War I. He was thrown in prison for speaking out against World War I. Woodrow Wilson put him in prison. He didn't get out until Warren G. Harding let him out. Now Bernie is really anti-war. Bernie was against Vietnam. He's against Iraq. Eugene Debs said that World War I was basically poor people being used to fight the battles for the wealthy, looking to increase their power. Kind of like the message of All Quiet on the Western Front. But he spoke out against the war, and then he was imprisoned for that. While he was imprisoned, he still ran for president and got nearly 1 million votes. There's one year where he got 6% of the vote. So pretty well known and popular. Nearly 1 million people voting for him back in 1900 when the population was way less. That's significant. He spoke out against what's called the Ludlow Massacre. This is something that should be taught in schools more often than it is. Basically, Rockefeller owned this big mine, and you had the miners that were advocating for better working conditions, and they wanted to be able to shop outside of the company, little town. They wanted to be able to spend their money in other ways. They wanted to be paid more money. They wanted to only work 8 hours a day. Things that are fairly reasonable. But anyways, they were in these little tent cities outside of the mine, and Rockefeller hired straight up thugs to go in and shoot them. Right here, you can follow along with where I'm highlighting. Hired a bunch of thugs from Texas, and then these thugs would raid the camps firing rifles and shotguns. And then the Colorado National Guard was called in, and they would form raids, and they were paid by the Rockefeller family. And understand that many of the rights that the miners wanted, they were required by Colorado law, but they remained unenforced. This is back, and even though it still exists today, it's like the politicians were bought by the large business interests, and then they threw their weight around. That's stuff that Bernie's against. So you can see where maybe Bernie has found inspiration and found